To my fellow millennial, majority of Intramuros' guests are from our generation. That is why I address this letter to you. Utilize it as your guide in touring Pasar Circa. I went to Intramuros a week before curating the works in this museum. I froze in time. It was as if it was my first time seeing Intramuros. Surely, my trip was for the appreciation of history, but the more immediate calling was the opportunity for a pictorial. As expected, my trip was focused on documenting the sights I saw. Seems familiar? If you're able to relate at this point, you may now proceed with the museum. During that trip, every moment had a snapshot because every corner was picture perfect. There was a stroke of enlightenment that came to me when my friend said that everything I see in front of me was mandated. The bricks, the stones, were all in conformity to the architectural guidelines prescribed by the Intramuros administration. As a design student and art appreciator, I was curious about such law that makes Intramuros what it is today. In your most recent trip, I bet you were astonished at the old-style Starbucks. I bet you even got your cameras out the moment you saw it. Intramuros is prominent for being untouched by modern architecture. It is through its nostalgic ambience that people are drawn into this walled city. This is the authentic atmosphere of the old Intramuros that we still experience today through the utilization of wood, adobe brick, capis, and other technical architectural motifs pertinent to the Spanish period, which are under the endeavor of the Intramuros administration. The great thing about Intramuros is that it now belongs to us. It belongs to you. From being the center of political and religious agenda, the official residence of Spanish viceroyalties, Spaniards and mestizos taking part on political issues, the city is now open for your leisure and education. Today, we find structural elements such as columns that make the area resistant to earthquakes, more voluminous windows that make interiors better ventilated, and roofs to shed the walkways from rain, and a lot more enhancements that turned Intramuros into a wholesome tourist destination. It is designed for you. It really has become common for us to avail of the tourism packaged here in Intramuros. With the accessibility of the tours, transportation and museum amenities, walking guides, we easily become aware of the history of the place. But at the same time, ironically, with the accessibility of all these e-trikes, pedicab, and kalesa tours, we lose sight of the small things, the stones, the bricks, the lampposts, etc. As we move about from one tourist spot to another, everything we see suddenly becomes too familiar. There is then no urgency to acknowledge where the beauty of Intramuros really comes from. We walk in and out of it without really thinking deeper on what draws us into it. As the museum title suggests, we simply pass by it. We know that the walls, ruins, facades, and balconies are historical and picture perfect, but we appreciate them on the surface level precisely because they're everywhere in this stone-walled city. It is a city completely constructed by stone blocks. So why would we miss seeing these blocks? They pass our eyes, and one moment we find it again. We find the same brick and the stone combination again and again, and not much attention is given to it. To us, it's beautiful, and that's just it. It's perfect for our Instagram feed. We shoot and then we leave. But really, aren't these bricks and the overall harmonization of the architectural elements the main contributing factor to Intramuros' beauty and aura? Aren't the preserved architectural traits of Intramuros the heart of the city? Don't we go here mainly to enjoy the nostalgia of the bygone Spanish period manifested through these architectural elements? We tour around to see churches and halls, the government offices, the museum halls, the park, the playgrounds, the community centers, and even the convenience centers, as well as the restaurants like Starbucks, which I mentioned earlier. We tour around to view these physical structures. We go climb that famous wall, not just to see the wall itself, but to get an overview of the whole of Intramuros and to see its architecture as a whole. The city whose buildings were restored from bombing now remains strong and preserved, and we're really just there to appreciate its newfound beauty. But in doing so, we often miss out on actually reading the buildings closely. The architecture is remarkable to us in such a way that it invites us to take pictures or an OOTD with a nice view of the ruin, but not actually to explore why and how they still exist and manage to look pretty. That is why I urge you to take an architectural reading of Intramuros every time we visit it. Discover the undiscovered, know why and how the wall from behind where you stopped for a picture still exists. Familiarize yourself with the material of these structures, for it is these building blocks that make Intramuros the Intramuros that is our past, the Intramuros that survived the ravages of time. Now let's take a little field trip to Intramuros. Enter each arc and stop. Excited? You probably got your cameras out already, but there's just really a picture to look at. At first glance, you may even have asked, what should I look at? Now I finally turned your attention to the masonry. The farol made with wrought iron, the cobblestone floor, and finally the wooden panel door. Have you ever wondered why this building is fashioned that way? When my friend and I stopped at this spot for a random picture, the door from behind us opened and the motorcycles were exiting through it. It caught my attention so much that I had to ask the guard from inside what the compound is. To my surprise, it was not an original building. It is an office that serves the concerns of Intramuros. It is an office that serves the concerns of Intramuros in this day. Hence, to answer the question I posed earlier, I would say I haven't been too curious with the architecture I see in Intramuros until that door opened. That was when I came to realize that the new constructions in Intramuros could really not be avoided. It's an open city after all. There must be a particular governing body that posts guidelines on architecture, since redeveloping Intramuros would result to a loss of heritage, to the loss of Intramuros itself. New buildings had to be designed in the Spanish colonial style, which is an eclectic style. Spanish architecture is simply the derivation of these ideas from an array of sources. It is characterized by the mixing and matching of elements of various styles to produce a desired visual impact. This is what the Intramuros administration, as established by the Presidential Decree 1616, strives to revive as a means of preserving Philippine heritage. Presidential Decree 1616 mandates an architectural criteria for exterior walls, doors, windows, entry passages, sidewalk finishes, and even exterior lighting. Here we find a lamp or a farol made with wrought iron, which is one of the allowable materials for lamps. I want you to spot these lamps in your next visit to Intramuros. It's also an artifact. For exterior walls, the only allowable types are wood, timber, and masonry, which shall be made of stucco, reinforced concrete hollow blocks, adobe, marble, pierre china, and granite. which is similar to the types allowable to sidewalk finishes, which are piedrecinas, adobe blocks, cobblestones, wood blocks, synthetic adobe bricks, and tiles. We see here the classic combination of masonry and cobblestone, which dates back to the prehistoric time where the use of stone was the norm and has been adapted by the early Spaniards. Enter into the next arc. Now, you're in a special zone. This is not an invented term. A special zone is a technical term defined in Presidential Decree 1616 in its policy and guidelines. Included in the declared special zones are the walls, the fortifications, San Agustin Church, the Ayuntamiento, the gates, and the archaeological sites. Here in this area, adherence to certain architectural motifs of the Hispanic period is strictly enforced. Of course, you should not miss the walls that enclose the famous walled city. As you walk, your gaze is far into the vastness of the city, or you're probably fixated with the wideness, steepness, and perhaps the emptiness of where you are. But again, I dare you to focus your eyes on the adobe bricks and adobe blocks. You're able to step foot on this historical landmark because of these bricks and blocks. On a side note, adobe bricks were abundant in the Spanish era because its material was easily accessible in Spain. Hence, they were able to utilize them as building materials. You stop at a point where your eye spots an entire ruin. You sit there for a picture because the ruins are so massive and captivating. As you sit, make a close reading of the building. By now, you should be able to name the stone wall finish, the adobe brick floor, the grilled windows made of wrought iron. Again, I'm encouraging you to name them one by one to get a fuller appreciation of the eclectic architectural style. Gaze far but not too far, that you miss out on what you are sitting on. I am sure your itinerary includes Casa Manila, or more particularly, a short pictorial in Casa Manila. Since it is found across the street of San Agustin, it is encompassed by a special zone. Here we find an architecture that resembles the typical Spanish residence. The building is known for antique-style hotels, restaurants, and most importantly, its courtyard, which I am quite sure you've already used as your photo shoot location. The courtyard is particular in the Spanish architecture because of its culture of gathering people for significant events. The same culture is achieved by this majestic courtyard in Casa Manila. People are gathered around it, but mostly to take Instagram photos. But again, I want you to think of what makes it picturesque in the first place. Start by looking at the stone arches enclosing brick portions of the wall, the capiz, the cobblestone floor, and the flat deck azotea, and even the lamps around. This is a prime example of Spanish colonial architecture, the architecture that mixes pieces into one coherent whole. I leave you with the appreciation of the rest of the works found here and of Intramuros itself, if you know by now how to appreciate. May our appreciation expand from our camera rolls. May it extend to actually understanding the agenda that lies behind the wall you've just taken a picture of. Preservation means restoration, and restoration entails nurture. As a tourist of Intramuros, contribute to the nurturing of the elements preserved by first becoming aware of what they are. The architecture in Intramuros is the first thing we notice as we step foot onto the city, but rarely do we actually take time to absorb it and know it by heart as we leave. I am no authority on Spanish colonial architecture, but I sure know that we have to be aware of it as part of our aesthetic and historical appreciation. If there's one thing I'd like to leave you as you exit the arcs of this museum, that is a more holistic exploration of who we are, where we've been, and where we are going.